Welcome to Libeth. Tonight, we explore not simply what these women wrote, but how they wrote, because the structure of a diary is never accidental. A fragmented court chronicle, a spiraling sequence of emotional exchanges, a retrospective memoir shaped by decades of memory and regret. Each diary organizes experience differently, and each structure reveals a different understanding of what a human life actually is. Tonight, we examine how form itself becomes meaning in the diaries of Murasaki Shikibu, Izumi Shikibu, and Sarashina. Form is never neutral. The way a text is put together, how it moves through time, what it includes and what it omits, where it begins and why it ends where it does, is always an argument about the nature of the experience being recorded. This is true of all literary forms, but it is especially true of the diary, because the diary presents itself as the most transparent of literary modes. Direct, personal, unmediated. What you are actually getting, in all three of these texts, is something considerably more constructed than that. A form chosen for what it can carry, shaped by what the writer needs to say and what she cannot afford to say directly. Understanding the structure of each diary is the first step toward understanding what each one is actually doing. Begin with Murasaki Shikibu's diary and begin with its most distinctive formal feature. It is fragmentary. Not fragmentary in the sense of damaged or incomplete, though some portion of the original may indeed have been lost, but fragmentary in the sense of structurally disjointed, deliberately or constitutively nonlinear. Reading it, you are aware from the first pages that you are not receiving a continuous account. There are gaps in time that go unexplained. There are events assumed to be known that the diary does not explain. There are passages that seem to begin mid-thought and passages that end without resolution. The text does not flow. It accumulates, and a series of more private, introspective passages in which the ceremonial world falls away, and she writes directly about her own emotional and psychological state. These three modes, ceremonial description, character analysis, self-examination, do not alternate in any neat or regular pattern. They interrupt each other. They bleed into each other. The structure is associative rather than sequential. The most interesting reading of this fragmentary quality is not that it represents an accident of survival, but that it is formally appropriate to what the diary is about. A diary structured like Murasaki's, where the elaborate public record keeps dissolving into private uncertainty, where the magnificent ceremony is followed by the record of the woman who felt nothing at it, is a diary whose form mirrors its content. The alienation it describes is structural. The gap between the external world and the internal one is not a theme the diary discusses. It is a quality the diary embodies. The ceremonies are described in extraordinary detail because the externally observable world is the one Murasaki can control, can render with absolute accuracy. The private passages are more fragmentary, more uncertain, less resolved, because that is what the private world actually is. She cannot resolve what she could not resolve in her life. The ending, which simply stops without conclusion, without declared wisdom, without homecoming, is the most honest ending available. Notice, too, what Murasaki's diary leaves out. The great absence is Genji. She was, during the period the diary covers, either completing or circulating the tale of Genji, arguably the most ambitious literary project any Japanese writer of any gender would undertake for centuries. And the diary barely mentions it. There is no sustained reflection on what it means to have written such a work, no account of the creative process, no examination of the relationship between the fictional world she built and the actual world she inhabited. She refers to it obliquely, in passing, as if it were something not worth dwelling on. This is so striking that it demands interpretation. One possibility. The diary circulated among readers who knew about Genji already, and she felt no need to explain or contextualize it. Another, the diary was not intended as a literary memoir, but as a record of court life, and Genji belonged to a different register. But the most interesting reading is that the diary and the novel are the same project, conducted in different modes. Genji is the version where she could say what she wanted to say, where intelligence was valued, where emotional complexity was honored, where a woman could have genuine interiority without it being a liability. The diary is the version where she had to be more careful. The great work is absent from the diary precisely because it is the secret text behind the diary, the one where she said what she couldn't say here. Now set the Izumi Shikibu diary against this, and the formal contrast is almost violent. Where Murasaki accumulates without resolving, Izumi spirals. Where Murasaki's structure is associative and discontinuous, Izumi's is kinetic and escalating. The text has an urgency to it that is not the urgency of crisis, but of feeling, of an inner world in continuous motion, circling the same emotional territory from different angles, moving forward not through linear progression, but through the accumulation of intensity. The formal unit of the Izumi diary is the poem exchange. In Heian culture, poems were not decorative, they were communicative. When Atsumichi sent Izumi a poem, he was not ornamenting a message. The poem was the message, encoded in the compression of the waka form, which she was expected to decode and respond to in kind. The exchanges of poems in the diary are scenes. Something happens in each one. Emotional territory is established or shifted or challenged. The relationship moves. The prose surrounding the poems is almost stage direction. It explains the circumstances that gave rise to the poem, the state of mind in which it was sent, the response it produced. Strip out the prose, and you have the emotional record. Add the prose back, and you have the narrative. This structural choice, poetry as action, prose as context, reflects the Heian aesthetic belief that the poem was the most concentrated form of truth available. You could narrate around an event forever. The poem captured the moment at its most essential. Izumi's diary is built on this belief, and it gives the text a compression and intensity that is different from anything in Murasaki or Sarashina. Each poem is a collision between what the relationship is and what it might become, between what Izumi wants and what she can have, between the social world that is watching and judging and the inner world that is doing the wanting. A question about the Izumi diary that scholars have not fully resolved. How much of it is contemporaneous record, and how much is retrospective construction? The text has more narrative shape than a raw diary typically has. The arc, grief for Tamataka as the opening condition, gradual opening toward Atsumichi, escalation, the arrival at something more settled and less driven by uncertainty, is too coherent to be simply a transcription of notes made in the moment. It is possible that Izumi arranged and edited the material after the fact, with the benefit of knowing how the story ended. It is possible that a third party compiled and shaped the material. The poems themselves are almost certainly authentic. They appear in other contemporary collections. but the prose scaffolding may have been arranged with a reader in mind. What matters is that even if the text was constructed retrospectively, it was constructed by or around someone who understood the emotional experience from the inside. The shape of the narrative, grief leading to hesitation, leading to desire, leading to risk, leading to depth, is the shape of how such things actually go. The details of the poem exchanges have the specificity of lived experience, not the generality of invention. And the ending, which is not a resolution in the dramatic sense, but a kind of exhausted arrival, the relationship having stabilized enough that the uncertainty which drove the diary has dissipated, is exactly the right ending for a text whose engine was uncertainty. When the uncertainty resolves, the diary ends. Not because the relationship is over, but because the thing the diary needed to record has completed itself. The Sarashina Diary is the most formally self-conscious of the three, and the most formally ambitious in scope. Where Murasaki covers roughly 2 years of court service, and Izumi covers roughly 1 relationship, Sarashina covers approximately 40 years, from childhood to old age, and covers them retrospectively, from the position of someone who has had time to watch the pattern emerge and understand what it was. The retrospective form is the fundamental formal choice, and it shapes everything. Sarashina is not reporting, she is constructing. She is looking back at a life and giving it the shape that only hindsight can provide, the shape of a story, with a beginning that has the quality of myth and an ending that has the quality of reckoning. She knows, writing in old age, what her childhood meant, what the Genji obsession did to her, what the court service failed to provide, what the losses accumulated into. She is arranging all of this into something that makes sense, that has the formal coherence of a narrative even though she is rendering a life, which is by nature formless. The structural logic of the Sarashina Diary is the logic of disillusionment. Each phase of the life promises something and delivers less than was promised. The childhood is the phase of maximum expectation. She is full of longing, saturated with the fictional world of Genji, heading toward a capital that she has already imagined in detail, and that cannot possibly match the imagination. The young womanhood is the phase of partial arrival and initial disappointment. The court service is brief and marginal. The real men are not Genji. The social world is smaller than the literary one. The adulthood is the phase of continued living within that disappointment. The marriage, the losses, the children who do not appear in the diary as people but as facts. And the old age is the phase of reckoning, the Buddhist regret, the self-accusation, the recognition that she organized her inner life around the wrong things. This arc, expectation to disillusionment to reckoning, is the shape of a particular kind of life story, and Sarashina chose it knowingly. She is a reader of Genji. She understands narrative shape. She is constructing her own life with the tools that her reading gave her, which is itself part of the argument the diary is making. The irony, which she seems to be aware of, is that she cannot tell her story outside the literary consciousness that the fiction built. Even the regret is shaped, is beautiful, is told with the craft that Genji taught her. The self-accusation cannot escape the literary sensibility it is accusing. What each diary leaves out is as revealing as what each includes. The omissions are not accidents, they are choices, and the choices tell us what each woman considered to be the true content of her life. Murasaki leaves out Genji. This we have discussed. But she also leaves out most of her life outside the court, her relationship with her daughter, her economic situation, the texture of daily existence that was not ceremony or social performance. The diary is entirely focused on the world inside the court, which is both the world she was most embedded in and the world she felt most alienated from. Everything outside is not relevant to the argument the diary is making, and so it disappears. Izumi leaves out the political context of the relationship with Atsumichi almost entirely. That relationship had political dimensions. He was an imperial prince, connected to specific factions, watched by people who had stakes in his behavior and associations. None of this appears in the diary. The political world has been stripped away, leaving only the emotional one. This is a radical formal choice. It asserts, by exclusion, that the inner life is what matters, that the relationship means what it means regardless of the political noise surrounding it. It is also a form of literary protection, rendering the affair as a love story rather than a political event makes it harder to read as the kind of court intrigue that would attract the most dangerous kinds of attention. Sarashina leaves out the life she actually lived. The children she raised appear so minimally that a reader who did not know better might not realize they existed. The husband who died is present mainly as an occasion for loss, not as a person with characteristics and a history. The domestic reality of 40 years, the household management, the daily rhythms, the social relationships of ordinary life, is almost entirely absent. What remains is the inner life, the reading, the longing, the dreaming, the disappointment. This is the most extreme version of the diary's fundamental claim, that the inner life is the real life, and the outer life is what surrounds it. Together, the three structures form a kind of complete map of the formal possibilities available to the Heian woman diarist. Accumulation without resolution. Spiraling intensity built from poem scenes. Retrospective arc shaped by the intelligence of long hindsight. Three different answers to the question of how to record a life when the true content of that life cannot be stated directly, when the social world requires a performance that the diary is the one place you don't have to give. Each structure is an argument. Each ending is a position. And the conversation among the three structures is itself part of what makes reading them together so much richer than reading any one alone. The structure of these diaries reveals something essential. Memory is never neutral. What each woman includes, omits, compresses, or expands becomes an argument about what mattered most in her life. Ceremony, desire, fiction, loneliness, loss. The distance between expectation and reality. These texts survived because they transformed experience into form, and because the forms they created remain astonishingly modern even now. That's all for tonight on Libeth. One new book every week. At least we try.